Hello everyone, batching into today's first video. We're doing the 5th Spring 2020 update for today's first video. So we're going to look at Analogues, of course, for this update, and it's going to be a bit of an ENSO special as well. So we'll be talking about the current ENSO state, where that ENSO state has been through this winter. We've been around ENSO neutral on the warm side of ENSO neutral, and we will have a look at past winters that had but were ENSO neutral, and the springs that followed them. So it'll become clear what we're doing as we go along, and I'll get on with that for you very shortly. Just to say that we've got GWV Study Roundup coming up around lunchtime. Have all of the latest developments with Storm Kira with that one, and we'll also do Ensembles Watch this evening. So, a busy old day at GWV today, and of course we have got this very nasty storm blasting way across the country. We'll have the latest developments on Storm Kira with GWV Study Roundup, and you'll be able to see that around or just after lunchtime. Been a very busy day for me today, so I've done 3 videos, as I'm recording a video on Saturday evening. I've done 3 videos today, did a live stream the night before, and we've had a few problems with this spring update as well. So I've been working on this all day. Around a couple of hours ago, I wasn't sure whether we'd even have a spring update this weekend, but I managed to pull it out the bag and get it together. So I'm feeling a bit tired, may make a few mistakes as we're going along through the video, and also my eye is playing up quite a lot as well tonight. So just bear with me. There's any snags, any problems as we go along. Hopefully they won't be too detrimental to the overall presentation. I've got to say a big thank you to our good friend James Ackrill, and also to Richard Shaw for all of their help with the spring update. So thank you both very much for your help, input, and whatnot. And I think that's pretty much everything I'm going to tell you. It could be a long video, of course, as always with the long range stuff. So if you can't watch it all, in one go, it will be put on the spring updates page. You see, there will be a written summary that goes with it as well, going over everything we talk about in the video. So you'll be able to watch the video on demand at gazweathers.com and also on the GWV YouTube channel. And you'll be able to have a read of that written summary as well from tonight. Right, I think that's everything I'm going to tell you. So let's get on with it and start off then talking about the current ENSO state. So this is the Cold Warm episodes by season page, which is part of CPC, NCB, and also NOAA 2. This is depicting every ENSO event going back to 1950 on tri-monthly basis. So you can see that in 1950, for example, we have a La Nina with these negative blue numbers through that tri-monthly period. 1953 is a El Nino period, a very weak El Nino year 1953 into 1954. Barely makes it into El Nino, required El Nino threshold. Black numbers are ENSO neutral numbers. So 1961, for example, is an ENSO neutral year on the slightly positive side through the first half of the year, and then ENSO neutral on the slightly negative side in the second half of the year. Let's come down to the latest year then, to 2019, and that's where we're currently at. So we start 2019 with a weak El Nino, then we go into an ENSO neutral phase on the warm side. This winter, the winter of 2019-2020, has been ENSO neutral on the warm side, and the last 2 tri-monthly periods for October, November, December, and November, December, January have just about reached weak El Nino threshold. To get to an El Nino threshold in terms of a temperature anomaly, you need to be half a degree or more above average. So that number just there, 0.5 plus 0.5, is a very important number, because that does get you to El Nino threshold, or the minimum El Nino threshold. The other thing you have to do, though, to have an El Nino designated, is to run it over 5 or more tri-monthly periods. So I've only had 2, tri-month periods that have reached El Nino threshold. To have an El Nino designated, we will have to keep that temperature anomaly or higher, 0.5 degrees or higher, over another 3 tri-monthly periods, which I think is going to be a big ask. So I think in the end, this winter that we are experiencing will be an ENSO neutral winter, but on the warm side of ENSO neutral, there's just the outside possibility it might end up as a very weak El Nino type winter, so sort of ENSO neutral on one side to borderline ENSO neutral. So winter we had in 2014-15, for example. You see these numbers just here: 0.6, 0.7, 0.6, 0.6, 0.6. So that is a weak, a very weak El Nino winter. It's kind of like borderlining whether it is an El Nino or not really. It's ENSO neutral on the warm side to borderline El Nino winter in 2014. 2050, of course, no debate about the following winter, which was a Super Nino winter, but that one, 2014-15, was a weak, very, very weak El Nino winter, borderlining somewhere between ENSO neutral on one side and weak El Nino. It's possible this winter might go in that direction. So what we're going to be looking for these spring analogues is going to be springs that follow ENSO neutral winters on the warm side, or just getting into very, very weak El Nino threshold. So if we scroll back up, actually a good example of that is going to be the year that we started off talking about actually at the beginning of this video, which is 1953, 1954. You see these numbers just here through the second half of 1953: 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.8, 0.5. So that is a very, very weak El Nino winter, sort of borderlining somewhere between ENSO neutral on the warm side and very weak El Nino. And so the spring would be relevant, and is going to appear. Spring of 1954 is going to appear. I hope I'm not giving any spoilers away. The spring of 1954 is going to appear in this video with the spring analogues, because that is relevant, I think, for like the current situation. Although we may never actually have a weak El Nino designated for this winter, we're sort of on that borderline, on that cusp between ENSO neutral on the warm side to very weak El Nino, going back through past decades. So this is what our good friend James Atwill got together for us some time ago. This is showing ENSO events through seasons, going all the way back to the 1800s, going back to 1865 with this phenomenal work from James for getting this together for us. So a good example, again, would be 1868 and 1869, just here. That's Mamadi's winter on record, and it did have a very, very weak El Nino. Look about 0.5, 0.7, 0.9, 0.9 through the latter part of 1968, and then 0.7, 0.5, 0.4 through the early months, or tri-monthly periods, I should say, of 1869. So that winter, the Mamadi's winter on record, is sort of on the cusp of a weak El Nino or ENSO neutral on the warm side. So therefore the spring that follows that is relevant for our analogues, and you will be seeing the spring of 1869 in a moment. So I hope that explains what we're doing and what we're looking for with these springs following winters. We've got more just here. This one takes from 1865 down to 1904, and then this one takes us from 1900 down to 1949. The official data begins in 1950, so this is all sort of reanalysis. There is a margin of error on these numbers, but I think they're pretty accurate overall. Another sort of good example of what we're doing with this, if we scroll back up, is going to be, it's going to be 1901, winter of 1900, 1901. So you see 1900 starts with an El Nino, goes back to weak El Nino through the summer, and then into ENSO neutral on the warm side through the latter part of 1900. So we've got 0.4 plus 0.4 again, plus 0.5 plus 0.6 plus 0.4. You see how we're just on the cusp through that winter of 1900, 1901, just on the cusp of ENSO neutral on the warm side or a very, very weak El Nino. And so, again, the spring of 1901 is going to be relevant and will be turning up within our analogues package. Another example is going to be 1904, 1905. Again, very weak El Nino, 0.6, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.6, 0.8, and so on. So, again, on the cusp, somewhere between ENSO neutral on the warm side or very, very weak El El Nino condition. ENSO neutral on the negative side, for a good example of that, we've got 1907, 1908. You see all of these, just very slightly negative numbers through 1907 and continuing into 1908. They are not relevant and not included in this package of analogues. We're looking for ENSO neutral on the warm side and discarding ENSO neutral on the cold side. Right, so that explains it all. So let's get on then with the analogues. The first spring we're looking at is 1867. This spring follows a warm ENSO neutral winter, or remember, it could be borderline weak El Nino. So the spring of 1867 is unsettled, and we're bringing the Atlantic big time with this. Low pressure is rolling in from off the Atlantic. So this is a very unsettled spring, very westerly, very Atlantic driven. Probably not particularly cold, I wouldn't have thought. Looks like everything's driving in from off the Atlantic, but it does look as though the spring of 1867 was very unsettled. We've got the spring of 1868 showing up next. So this one is very zonal and westerly. The spring of 1868 has above average heights sitting to our south and below average heights are sitting to the north. There's the westerly winds coming in from off the Atlantic. Probably a rather drier spring, and I would have thought relatively mild as well for the spring of 1868. This is the spring of 1869, following the mildest winter on record. As we've already established, the winter of 1868-1869 was a very weak El Nino to borderline warm ENSO neutral type winter. Wonder what the Indian Ocean dipole would have been doing during the winter of 1868-1869, whether it was very warm and that sort of exaggerated the El Nino signature, and that's what led us to have the warmest winter on record. We shall never know, but it's interesting to ponder. But anyway, the spring of 1869 is a lot colder. This one has below average heights across the northern, central and western parts of Europe, and above average heights out towards Greenland and Iceland. The jet stream does something like that through the spring of 1869. So this is quite a cold spring following the mildest winter on record. Never been beaten up to now in the CET, and I don't think the winter of 2019-2020, as mild as it has been, I don't think this winter is going to beat the winter of 1868-1869 either. I think that is safe for another year in terms of being the warmest winter on record. As I say, quite a cold spring, and there was some snow, especially early on in the spring of 1869. Our next warm ENSO neutral winter to spring is 1881. This is a very cold winter, of course, 1880, 1881, and the pattern kind of continues into the spring as well. We have quite a strong blocking signal to the north, lots of low pressure to the west and also to the east of us, bringing in the winds from more of a northeasterly type direction in the spring of 1881. Our next spring is 1885. This one is really unsettled. Overall, I don't think we've got a trend yet. They've all been rather different to one another. This one, very unsettled spring with lots of low pressure covering much of northern, central and western Europe as well. So the spring of 1885 looks like it would have had a lot of unsettled weather within it. The next spring is 1888, and this one is a little bit colder as well. Below average heights again, covering much of northern, western Europe, but a bit more of a blocking signal up towards Greenland. Jet stream will be on a southerly track here around there, so that's a rather colder and more wintry type spring in 1888. The next spring is 1901. We talked about that a minute ago, of course. So again, on that cusp of warm ENSO neutral to borderline El Nino, somewhere on that cusp, and this one is an unsettled spring again, so maybe a bit of a trend early on for an unsettled spring in some ways. Below average heights trucking down to our south with the jet stream as well, a bit of a blocking signal up to the north too. That looks like it's a rather cooler and rather unsettled spring in 1901. The next spring, following a warm ENSO neutral winter, is 1905. Again, looking unsettled. Lots of low pressure coming in from off the Atlantic with the jet stream too. There are a lot of these springs and winters, by the way, so we will be here for a little while. We've got plenty more to get through yet. This is the spring of 1914. This one is unsettled. Lots of low pressure up to the north. Quite a strong westerly as well. That's a mild spring, potentially quite a very mild spring, but also very unsettled with plenty of rain off the Atlantic. Excuse me. The next spring, excuse me. Throat is struggling a little bit today with all of these updates. The next spring is 1915. This one's a rather colder spring with a mid-Atlantic ridge out to our west and below average heights to the east. That's that's not such an unsettled spring. It's more settled spring, but it is rather colder as well. That's quite a cold spring in 1915. 1920 is our next spring, following ENSO neutral winter on the warm side. This one with above average heights to the south and below average heights to the north and northwest. It's just a very standard westerly, southwesterly spring. So again, probably quite mild, no problems with temperatures with that one. A little bit on the unsettled side in the spring of 1920. Spring of 1924 is our next one. So this one, again, quite unsettled. Low pressure coming in off the Atlantic. Bit of a blocking signal as well around Greenland. So very nearly a cold spring. But actually, I think this is a relatively mild spring overall with winds off the Atlantic. Next spring is 1928. This one has more of a northern blocking signal, has plenty of high pressure up towards Greenland and Iceland. It has a lot of low pressure to our south, but jet stream is also digging to the south as well in the spring of 1928. That's a colder spring and quite unsettled too. Then we've got the spring of 1930 turning up next. This one with a bit of a blocking signal to the north. Again, below average heights over and to the south of the country. That looks like quite a cool and unsettled spring in 1930. The next spring is 1936. This one is more anticyclonic. The low pressure is down to the south. We've got higher pressure building through central and northern parts of the country to North Atlantic too. It looks like it will probably be quite an easterly spring. Remember, spring is a transitional season, so easterlies in March will be quite cold. Easterlies in May can actually be relatively warm. That could be quite a mild but also thundery type pattern for 1936. By the way, 1936 is important for this update, because when we come to combine all years, we can only use 20 analogues, if you see what I mean. We can only use 20 years to combine. We've got way more than 20 in the overall package here. So what I did with this is the all years combined start with 1936 and end with the most recent chart. So the final 20, if you like, will be they will be all years combined analogues. So we move on to 1937. Again, which is a spring following a warm ENSO neutral winter or borderline weak El Nino. This one with low pressure out to the west of us. Quite a Scandinavian high on this one. But overall, I don't think it's that cold in the spring of 1937. I think essentially it's just quite unsettled with low pressure in off the Atlantic. The spring of 1938 looks like a very, very nice spring. It's the first one we've seen, really, that has a strong anticyclonic signal, but this one has high pressure centred pretty much over the top of the country. Lots of low pressure to our north, you'll notice. So we're pushing the jet stream through something like that. Interesting, we've got 1936, 1937 and 1938, so we've got 3 in a row here. And this one is a mild and dry spring, actually a very warm spring, and a lot of dry weather on offer as well through the spring of 1938. Then we've got 1947, of course. This follows the severely cold winter of 1947. The pattern gets back to normal, really, through the spring as low pressure comes back, high pressure builds to the south. You can see the leftover blocking signal from the winter fading away within the northern latitudes. Overall, it turns much milder in the second half of March. There's a rapid thaw of what is really deep snow cover, of course, with severe flooding, and the rest of the spring is generally mild and also quite wet. Then we've got the spring of 1953. This one is an anticyclonic spring as well. Above average heights centering across much of central, northern, west Europe and pulling out into the Atlantic too. So that's a rather mild, rather warm, rather mild and dry spring in 1953. Nice spring, that one. 1954, we talked about that at the start of the video, but this one was going to turn up, so here it is. Above average heights, again, blocking things out to the north, below average heights to the south. This follows quite a cold winter, or quite a cold late winter in 1954. Looks like the pattern really continues into the spring. Quite a lot of easterly winds, probably a cold start to that spring, and then gets milder later with those easterlies becoming warmer. Quite dry spring too. 1959 begins the very extended hot summer of 1959. So here we are in the spring with above average heights to our east, below average heights out to the west. Winds are coming up from a southerly direction. So that's a mainly dry and pretty warm spring as well in 1959. Remember, 1959 has a glorious extended summer. It starts as early as kind of April, May, and it goes on right the way through to the end of October. So 1959 is a glorious year, and the pattern of that summer begins in the spring, a warm, dry spring in 1959. The next spring to follow a warm ENSO neutral or borderline weak El Nino winter is 1961. This one also with above average heights. It's interesting now how we're beginning to shift towards a much more anticyclonic signal. The very early analogues we looked at before 1936, they were generally very unsettled and low pressure dominated. Now we've shifted seemingly into a more anticyclonic type pattern, which is quite interesting. This one again, high pressure covering much of Western Europe, so a lot of warm, dry weather on offer in the spring of 1961. Then we've got 1970. This is a bit of a change. It has a mid-Atlantic ridge with high pressure out to west. It has a trough of low pressure to our east, and consequently we're bringing in a northerly wind there in the spring of 1970. It has a very cold start to the spring with severe blizzards in early March and deep snow too, and generally it's quite a cold spring overall in 1970. 1977 is our next spring with below average heights over the UK, Northern Europe, above average heights around Greenland and Iceland. That one is just a rather mild and unsettled spring in 1977. 1978 is quite a cold and wet spring. This one with below average heights covering much of Western Europe and out into the Atlantic. A bit of a blocking signal up to the north as well. This is quite an unsettled spring in 1978 and frequently quite cold too, with winds regularly coming in from an easterly direction. 1980 turns up next. So this one has above average heights to our north, below average heights to our south and southeast, and quite an easterly spring. Quite a bit of dry weather around in the spring of 1980, and I think it was a little bit thundery, particularly in May of 1980. So not sure what's going on there. That should be that's 1900, isn't it? So I think we've got 1901 turning up there, so I'm not sure quite what's happened there. They should be that's 1900 and 1901, so they should be 1990 and also 1991. So what I'm going to do is pause the video and I'll get the analogues up. I'm not sure how they have turned up that part of the video there out of sequence. So I shall pause the video there. I'll get 1990 and 1991 up for you and we'll meet back very shortly. So I'll see you soon. Okay. Okay, we're back, and we've got the right analogues up. Sorry about that, everybody. It's been a really, really long day, and I'm running on fumes, I have to say. At the moment, we're running on coffee and adrenaline, really, at GWV Towers now. We've reached that point of the evening at 22:37, as I'm recording the video on the evening of Saturday, the 8th of February 2020. I'm about done for. So, bit of a mistake with the analogues, but they're all in order now. I've made sure there's not going to be any more nasty surprises. So we go from the spring of 1980 to the spring of 1990. This is another spring following a warm ENSO neutral to borderline weak El Nino type winter. This one, the spring of 1990, has lots of above average heights across much of Western Europe, below average heights in the north, within the northern latitudes. Jet stream is up there. That's a warm and dry spring in 1990. Of course, 1990 is a hot summer, and the pattern gets going in the spring of 1990 with a lot of warm and dry weather. Of course, there is an interruption to that in June 1990, which is rather a cold and wet month. But overall, the pattern for the summer begins getting going in the spring of 1990. Our next spring is 1991. This one, again, with above average heights dominating. We've definitely shifted towards a more anticyclonic type pattern as we've gone along with these analogues, which is quite interesting, I think. Below average heights down across southern parts of Europe. Probably quite a lot of easterly winds through this spring, but it's generally quite a mild spring, quite a warmish spring in 1991, and plenty of dry weather to be enjoyed. 1993 is our next spring, so we've got 1990, 1991, and 1993. This one has below average heights out to our west, above average heights to our east, bringing up the wind from a southerly direction a lot of the time. That's a warm spring in 1993, very mild spring, and also pretty dry as well. And then we've got 1994, so loads from the 1990s. This one is rather more unsettled, with below average heights to the north and above average heights to our south. Very westerly type spring. There's quite a potent cold snap through April of 1994, around Easter actually, I think, of 1994. Otherwise, it's generally quite a warm spring, and a little bit on the unsettled side as well. Then quite a long gap to 2004. That's our next spring, following a warm ENSO neutral winter to borderline weak El Nino. This one with above average heights quite close, so a fairly anticyclonic spring. There's quite a lot of warm weather through the spring of 2004, except it starts a bit on the cold side. Early March 2004 is quite cold, but otherwise the rest of it is generally warm, and there's quite a bit of dry weather around in the spring of 2004 as well. 2005 is our next spring. So again, this one has below average heights coming in off the Atlantic and into northern parts of Europe. High pressure is up towards Greenland, and there's some high pressure down across southern Europe as well. It's a little bit on the unsettled side this spring. Again, has a cold start to March. The first half of March is cold, and that's because of the northern blocking, of course, towards Greenland. So it does have a cold first half to March. Otherwise, again, when that eases in the second half of March, the rest of the spring is generally quite mild and a little bit on the changeable side. Then we've got the spring of 2007. With above average heights, again, building in from the Atlantic into much of Western Europe. Below average heights up to the north. Jet stream is pushed northwards as well. So that's an interesting spring. Of course, lots of warm and dry weather through March and April of 2007, especially warm in April, which is an exceptionally mild and dry month. Some places get no measurable rainfall at all throughout April 2007. And then in May 2007, it's not particularly obvious from the analogue there, but in May 2007, things change dramatically. High pressure sets up within the northern latitudes, and we go into a very wet and quite cold pattern through May, and then that lasts into the summer of 2007, which of course is a deluge summer, has tremendous rain and tremendous flooding. But through most of the spring of 2007, actually it's pretty warm and dry. Spring 2015, also quite an anticyclonic signal. Low pressure is up towards Greenland and Iceland, but through much of Western Europe, we've got this area of above average height, so quite a lot of warm and dry weather through the spring of 2015. And then the last spring that we've got here, which follows warm ENSO neutral to borderline weak El Nino, is the spring of 2019. 2019, of course, has the above average heights extending through much of Western Europe, below average heights out to our west. There's again a lot of dry weather through the spring of 2019, and it is often mild as well. Does have a rather cooler interlude through March, though. March 2019 is rather cooler, but otherwise relatively anticyclonic. So if we put all of that together then, and combine all years, I say we can only combine it from 1936 to current years, because of course earlier than that we've got too many analog years, if you like. So we can only do 20, and I decided for this we would start with 1936 as far back as we can get to stay within the 20, and come back to like the modern era. So for March, is how all March combines are looking, with above average heights centred away to the north and eastern country, below average heights out to west and south. Jet streams doing something a bit like that. It looks like overall there's a bit of anticyclonic influence for the Marches. You expect these Marches to be relatively mild, quite dry as well. Winds are kind of on average, I would have thought, southerly, southeasterly, so should be pretty mild with those Marches. I think occasionally in that sort of pattern there would be an occasional, sort of small number of years that might be quite cold from the east, but generally that's a relatively mild and dry signal to start us off for all Marches combined. This is how all Aprils combined are looking. This time the above average height sets up to the west-southwest, below average heights up to the north. Again, quite an anticyclonic signal, probably not overly unsettled. More of an Atlantic influence though, so for northern areas it probably is a more unsettled signal, but I think overall still probably relatively anticyclonic with a lot of these Aprils. And then as we go through to May, well, look at this, a very nice looking all years combined for May with these analogues. So we have above average heights centering over and just to the north of the country, below average heights tending to be more towards the south and east. We are favouring bringing in more of an easterly wind with that. But of course in May, easterly winds are probably going to be relatively mild. I think there's a lot of dry weather on offer with those Mays, and a lot of them could be quite warm and maybe even fairly summer-like too. And then finally, bringing it all together, this is how all springs are looking following warm ENSO neutral to borderline weak El Nino winters are looking, and it's an anticyclonic signal. Yes, that's the first time we've seen this with the spring updates. It's an anticyclonic signal. The above average heights tend to be focused very close to the UK, so we are almost under an area of high pressure through the springs. Below average heights tend to be out to west and also to the east. The jet stream does something like that. And that's not a bad analogue at all for the springs that follow ENSO neutral, warm ENSO neutral to borderline weak El Nino winters. That is not a bad analogue at all to sign off on with this update. So this is the first one that we've seen that isn't notably unsettled. This one throwing a little bit of a a little bit of a grenade into the mix, because it's very different to all of the other spring updates we've done so far. This one's suggesting the chance of a much drier and warmer spring, perhaps, than we have been seeing within these updates over the past few weeks since we started them at the beginning of January. It's all food for thought, and of course all of these updates individually are building up their own picture, are important in their own terms, but in the end they're going to be placed within the winter forecast. And we get to the end of February, we're going to bring all of these updates together and we'll see which years have been the leading analogue years, and then we will create our forecast for the spring of 2020 based on that, and also of course on what the long range models are showing. Right, so that's it for the 5th Spring 2020 Analogues update. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting and informative. This video will be placed on the Spring Updates and Forecast page with a written summary going over everything that we discussed in the video this evening. Before then, we're going to have GWV Spring round, which will have all of the latest developments in terms of Storm Kira, and we will also be doing Ensembles Watch, hopefully anyway, this evening. So keep checking back to all of the updates. I'm going to go and find a dark room and collapse in a heap now, because I'm just about done for after all of these updates that I've been doing over the past day or so. Alright then, so 34, almost 35 minutes. That's all for now, and thanks very much for watching.